We think we know the story of Genghis Khan, the master strategist, the boy who rose from hunger and betrayal to weld the warring steppe tribes into a single, unstoppable force. History carves his image in bronze, casting him as the brilliant commander who built the largest land empire the world has ever seen. But this polished legend, the tale of cavalry charges and battlefield genius, is a carefully constructed myth. It conceals the true engine that powered his conquest, a darker, more terrifying machine built not on steel and horses, but on a cold, brutal arithmetic of reproduction and terror. The truth is, the Mongol Empire was forged by a system of sexual politics and calculated cruelty so extreme it remains shocking to this day. What I am about to reveal are the hidden practices and private laws that governed the most feared court on earth, and how they created a legacy written not in stone, but in our very blood. To understand the monster, you must first understand the boy. Long before he was Genghis Khan, the universal ruler, he was Temujin, a child of the unforgiving Mongolian steppe. His world was one of constant, grinding survival, where tribal loyalties shifted like the dust, and a single act of violence could shatter a family forever. For young Temujin, that act came when his father, Yesugei, was poisoned by a rival Tartar tribe, a slow and agonizing death that left his family utterly defenseless. They were abandoned by their clan, cast out to starve in the wilderness. Betrayed and hunted, Temujin learned his first and most important lesson. Power was the only thing that mattered. Vengeance became the fire in his belly, a promise whispered in the cold steppe nights. This was not just a desire for retribution. It was the forging of a worldview. He would never be weak again. He would not just defeat his enemies, he would erase them, ensuring they could never rise to threaten him or his descendants ever again. By the year 1202, the hunted boy had become the hunter. Temujin, now a rising warlord, finally cornered the last of the Tartar forces, the tribe that had murdered his father. His order for their annihilation was not a moment of uncontrolled rage. It was an act of chillingly precise systemic erasure. The decree was simple and grotesque. Every Tartar male taller than the iron linchpin of a cartwheel, roughly 3 feet high, was to be executed on the spot. Imagine the horror of that scene. A boy, barely old enough to understand, is dragged before a soldier and measured against the axle of a wagon. One cold glance determines his fate. Thousands were slaughtered, an entire generation of men wiped from the face of the earth. But the women were spared, not for mercy, but for a purpose far more strategic. They were seized as the spoils of war, their identities stripped away as they were absorbed into the households of the Mongol victors. Temujin himself took 2 beautiful Tartar sisters, Yisugen and Yisui, as his own wives. This was the blueprint. Destroy the male line, seize the female line, and steal the enemy's future in a single, brutal generation. The Tartar conquest was not an anomaly. It was the model. This strategy of conquering and absorbing was refined and repeated with chilling efficiency. Years earlier, the Merkit tribe had committed an unforgivable crime. They had raided Temujin's camp and abducted his young wife, Berta, a deep humiliation he would never forget. When his armies finally crushed the Merkits, he not only reclaimed his wife, but also seized the chief's widow, Torrigen, and later gave her to his 3rd son, Ogadai. That captive woman would one day rule as regent of the entire Mongol Empire, a testament to the power that could be gained through strategic marriage. An even more consequential union came after the defeat of the Karaites, his former allies. Genghis Khan took their most brilliant noblewoman, Sorghaghtani Beki, and arranged her marriage to his youngest son, Tolui. This was a masterstroke of political engineering. From this single forced marriage, 4 emperors were born: Mungke, Kublai, Hulagu, and Arik Boka. These 4 grandsons would command the vast dominions of China, Persia, and the Mongol heartland itself. The message was now unmistakable: conquer the men, kill their lineage, marry their women, and breed a new imperial dynasty from the ashes of your enemies. To control an empire built from the fragments of dozens of conquered peoples, Genghis Khan needed more than just fear. He needed an unbreakable, unifying code. At the Great Assembly, or Kurultai, of 1206, where he was proclaimed Genghis Khan, he unveiled this tool, a secret body of laws known as the Great Yasa. Unlike other legal codes, the Yasa was not written down for public display. It was a secret doctrine, known only to the Khan and his princes, but its reach was absolute and its punishments were swift and public. The Yasa was the operating system for the Mongol war machine. It demanded absolute loyalty and military discipline, but its harshest rules governed private life. Adultery, whether by a man or a woman, was punishable by immediate death. To even approach another man's wife was a capital offense. A quarrel over a woman could splinter a military unit, and a soldier distracted by jealousy was a soldier not watching the enemy. Under the Yasa, every action, from the battlefield to the bedroom, was scripted and controlled, binding every subject in a web of obedience and terror. Genghis Khan's power radiated from his household, a massive mobile state that moved across the steppe. At its center were not just soldiers but women. At the apex stood his 4 principal wives, each a formidable power in her own right, starting with his first love, Berta. Each of these senior queens presided over her own court, or ordo. These were not mere tents. They were sprawling mobile capitals throbbing with wealth, trade, and politics. Each ordo was assigned its own lands, servants, and immense herds of livestock, functioning as a self-contained economy. Beneath these 4 queens stretched a rigid hierarchy of lesser wives and hundreds of concubines, many taken from conquered nations, organized into companies. By the end of his life, his personal retinue contained around 500 women, but these women were far from idle prisoners. They advised on policy, managed staggering wealth, and most importantly, they bore the empire's heirs. The ordos were the imperial nurseries, the crucibles where the future rulers of the world were born and raised. The Mongol system for consolidating power extended even beyond death. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, his chosen successor, Ogedai, didn't just inherit armies and treasuries. He also inherited his father's household, including his junior wives and concubines. This was the practice of levirate marriage, an ancient steppe tradition the Mongols scaled to an imperial level. To outsiders, it was horrifying. The Franciscan envoy, John of Plano Carpini, wrote of it with disgust, noting that a son, upon his father's death, would take all his father's widows as his own, with the sole exception of his own mother. This boundary was absolute, but every other woman, his stepmothers, was considered part of the estate, property to be inherited just like herds of horses or tents. This wasn't about love or desire. It was a cold, pragmatic strategy to ensure that the wealth, alliances, and political influence attached to a noblewoman never left the family bloodline. Power was a closed circuit, flowing seamlessly from father to son. All these systems, the absorption of women, the iron law of the Yasa, the consolidation of wealth, culminated in a new form of warfare, one designed not just to defeat enemies, but to obliterate them psychologically. The Mongol invasion of the wealthy Khwarezmian Empire began after a Mongol trade mission was slaughtered and the Khan's envoys were executed and humiliated. The Khan's reply was not just a war, but a demonstration of devastation on a scale the world had never imagined. When a city resisted and fell, a terrible ritual unfolded. The population was herded outside the walls. Artisans and skilled workers were separated, destined for service in Mongolia. The young and beautiful women were taken as concubines for the warriors. Then, before the killing began, came the ultimate humiliation. Chroniclers describe soldiers committing mass rape in full view of the victims' fathers, husbands, and children. This was not random lust. It was systematic degradation, a calculated act of terror designed to shatter a people's will to resist forever. At Nishapur, after a royal son-in-law was killed, the Khan's own daughter demanded a revenge so total that to ensure no one was feigning death, every man, woman, child, and even the city's dogs and cats were decapitated, their skulls piled into gruesome pyramids. The Mongol Empire eventually crumbled. The great cities were rebuilt, and the text of the Yasa was lost to time. Yet the Khan's most profound legacy remained, silent and invisible, hidden in the cells of millions. In 2003, a team of geneticists published a landmark study that analyzed Y chromosome data from populations all across the former Mongol Empire. They found something extraordinary, a single, unique paternal lineage present in roughly 8% of the men in the region, which translates to about 0.5% of the entire male population on Earth. That's around 16 million men today who carry this identical genetic signature. Using mutation rates to create a genetic clock, scientists trace this lineage back to a single common ancestor who lived in Mongolia approximately 1,000 years ago. Genetics cannot put a name to a strand of DNA, but the time, the place, and the unprecedented biological success pointed to only one man in all of human history. Genghis Khan, aided by the sons who carried his bloodline and his brutal vision across continents. This is the final, unalterable truth of Genghis Khan's empire. It was a perfectly integrated, ruthless machine. The Iron Code of the Yasa created disciplined soldiers. Those soldiers waged wars of extermination, capturing countless women. Those women were absorbed through marriage and concubinage, their bloodlines woven into the Mongol elite to produce heirs in the great rolling queendoms. Through levirate marriage, those heirs inherited everything, consolidating all power within a single lineage. Conquest, absorption, reproduction, and inheritance. A relentless cycle that fueled the most explosive imperial expansion in history. Palaces crumble into dust and archives can burn, but genes endure. Genghis Khan's final dominion is not a territory carved on a map or a story written in a chronicle. It is a biological empire, silent and indelible, coursing through the veins of millions. It is a legacy encoded not in stone but in living flesh, as vast and unyielding as the steppe he once rode.